avenue, and it is sort of the one that I think is the ultimate goal. But some other things that it could look like for us, school choice means that most of the public school districts in Michigan are what we call, now this is going to get really confusing, school of choice. And all that means is that you can live within one districted area.
Mhm.
And if another school district has opted to open its doors and be a school of choice, you can go to another public school district, even though you don't live within that. And because we're funded, each student is worth X amount of dollars, the dollars go with the student to their new home district. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And then there's charter schools. Charter schools can be run, well, first of all, a charter school, let me explain this for people who don't know. It means that some other entity, and in my state, it has to be a public university, a community college, or a what we have are called intermediate school districts. It's like each county is overseen by what's called an intermediate school district, all the little districts within it. Or your public school district can be the chartering, I think, authorizer. And then there's a charter or a school operator, right? So that school operator is the one that you hear a lot about being either nonprofit or for profit. So there are cases in our state, like New York Times did a big article about charters in Detroit. There are cases where a charter school in Detroit, its charter authorizer is the Bay Mills Community College, which is up in the UP, some like 10 hours away. Um, but so that's what school choice looks like for here, if that's helpful. Now, the good thing is, like I keep saying in Michigan, what everybody should hear is education is local. Every time I say that, just think to yourself, education is local, which means that DeVos doesn't have a ton of power to move the needle right now on school of choice being in Washington, but she does have the bully pulpit. I mean, the bully pulpit's only as good as approval rating, I suppose. But she does have the bully pulpit nonetheless to stand there and advocate for it. But you can't, it would be really difficult to legislate that on a nationwide basis because schools are left to the state.
Well, and it sounds like she's figuring that out, or maybe she already knew it, but it sounds there seems to have been a shift in DeVos's rhetoric lately, where she has been saying, I'm not going to try to make some sort of federal mandate for school choice. That's not where that should come from, that this is a state issue. But, as you mentioned, Allison, if her family can put a lot of money into politics everywhere, they can have a big influence in the states, like the upcoming Virginia governor's race.
Right, which they've put a bunch of money into. The Great Lakes Education Project that I was mentioning before, I don't have the list of states in front of me, but they've set up groups like that in about 5 or 6 other states. So I think it's like New Jersey I saw on the list. I don't remember the other ones, unfortunately, but I know that she set up things like that in other places. So you're exactly right. It's local, but they still have that DeVos family money.
Yeah, I mean, Illinois is a really interesting case with education, especially in the past few years. Illinois, it sort of always has this big divide between Chicago and the rest of the state. The majority of the residents live in Chicago, but the rest of the state is much bigger geographically, and so there's always a sort of divide in Springfield between what Chicago wants and what the rest of the state might want. And this especially comes to play when there's things like tax dollars at stake. As a lot of people know, Illinois didn't have a budget for like 2 years or something, some ridiculous amount of money. We have a governor who just won't sign anything and hopefully won't have him for very much longer. But there's very recently been an interesting Senate bill. Senate Bill 1 in Illinois was finally passed as a way of funding education, and we had a sort of similar problem about property taxes and, people who were coming, schools that were in districts with lower property values, not having as much money. And so they've finally come up with a plan to sort of reapportion the money in ways that's a little more fair to students. But in order to get it passed and to get it signed by the governor, they had to make a compromise that gives tax credits to people who donate to private school scholarship funds. I don't know exactly how that's going to play out, I know the principal at our Catholic school seemed happy about it. I suspect that the public schools are much less happy about it, and so I'm sort of torn between being a parent who thinks it would be great to get some tax money back and be able to use it for this tuition I have to pay, but the larger part of me thinks I don't want anything taking money away from our public schools. That sounds terrible. So it'll be interesting to see how that actually plays out as it gets implemented.
So yeah, Ohio is all about choice, as you probably know. We do have charters, we do have vouchers. We were one of the first states to have vouchers, I think, or at least we were in the first group. We had one of the test cases in the Supreme Court about that up in Cleveland. It was about giving state money to parochial schools, and it was decided that was okay. So that's still going on. We have a Cleveland voucher program, and then we also have there are two different kinds of vouchers here in Ohio. You can either get them for attending a failing school, like you live in an area where there's a failing school, so they'll give it to you. Or, and this just passed a couple years ago, if you are low income, if you're under a certain level and you go to any school in the state, if you're under a certain level of income, you can get a voucher and go anywhere else. And so that could have an interesting effect. You could be going to a really, really good school district, but still get a voucher because you're poor. So, and I don't know how often that plays out. I need to look into that some more. But yeah, there are 14 states that have voucher programs, including, and DC is well included in that. Yeah, like you said, charters really didn't become a thing in Ohio until about 2000. I mean, I think that they became legal in 1997 here, and I think that they really started to surge in like 2000 through about 2010. And then I think they've peaked, and I think that new charter schools opening, like for the first time, they've started to go down. Mm-hmm. So, and also like you see less kids opting for that, but I mean it's still a pretty substantial number. You still got a couple 100,000 kids going to charter schools, and those schools are only in urban areas in this state in Ohio. So there isn't a whole lot of choice going on in the rural areas. The only kind of choice they really have is open enrollment, which is it's kind of the same thing as Alison was saying about school of choice up in Michigan. So open enrollment is if you go to a school district and you don't want to go there, you can if there's another school district that has open enrollment, like has opted for that, you can jump over to them. But if you live in a rural district, your school district could be like 144 square miles or something like that. So to get to that, you don't get transportation or anything. So, I mean, I don't know how many kids are really taking advantage of that. The interesting thing about open enrollment is that a school district is allowed to decide whether they're going to do that or not. And almost all the like a majority of the school districts in Ohio do, except for the ones right around the rings around the urban areas. Like around Cleveland, around Cincinnati, around Columbus, Youngstown, those school districts do not allow open enrollment. So there's little suburban, So the people who are in those urban areas pretty much have to stay in those urban areas, and choose a charter school or get a voucher And then there's a new animal out there, a totally new hybrid of everything. There are I think 5 states that are doing this. They're called education savings accounts. And so they're not the same as vouchers. Let me see if I understand this, because we don't have them yet, but they're moving around. They're like in other parts of the country. A parent can actually take the money from the state that they would have gotten to go to public school, like it's like that per student amount, and they can take it and use it anywhere they want to, like any private school, any for tutoring services So it's just a completely different thing, online courses, therapies for kids with special needs, that kind of thing. So we're seeing that on the horizon also.
If anyone wants to be really confused about school choices or just wants a really good read, you should download the 153-page Chicago Public Schools, what's it called? The Elementary and High School Guide. Pretty sure no one but me has ever read this cover to cover.
Oh, wow.
I don't recommend it, actually.
Like party, Kelly.
Well, you know me. On a Saturday night, man.
if it makes you feel better, they tried to create something like that for Detroit that would encompass all of the Detroit public schools and their charters, and then there would be one place that you went to enroll for everything rather than having to seek out each individual school building in the case of charters, or
Huh.
the public schools in the case of Detroit, and it was turned down. They said no. So at least you had a 150-page book.
At least I did. No, I mean, I have an advanced degree, right? And I had so much trouble figuring out what our options even were in schooling. Like, I can't even imagine most parents trying to. I suspect most parents just give up and don't try because it's so confusing. I mean, there's charter schools, there's magnet schools, there's magnet cluster schools, there's selective enrollment schools. There's two different kinds of selective enrollment schools at the elementary school level. There's your neighborhood school. I mean, it's maddening. Like, and all of that is just like within the public school system in Chicago, just in the city of Chicago.
I sympathize with you sending your children to private because this is Allison, when we lived in Grand Rapids, we loved living in the city, but the school district just wasn't great. Though there were pockets that were really awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really confusing to try to figure out which ones are the really awesome schools. Do I send him to a private school, even though I'm a pretty fierce public school advocate? Do I send him to whatever elementary school because my husband and I are both educators? We can make up the difference. There's a 6th-grade zoo school. Do I want to keep him in the public schools just so he can go to the school at the zoo during 6th grade? Like, it's mind-boggling, and that district is not even anything near the size of Chicago Public. So I can imagine making the decision to send your kid to private, even if you love public schools. So
Well,
it's all confusing.
yeah, and so it's confusing, and it's also, not having a budget for 2 years in the state and not even knowing if the public schools were going to like continue to exist. Like, it's been our Catholic school has grown by leaps and bounds over the past 2 years, and they're all excited that they're doing a lot right, and I think there is a lot that they're doing right. I mean, it's a really great school, but I think they can also thank Governor Rauner for a lot of the growth of the Catholic school.
So, I was in DC, speaking of like the confusion of choice, and I talked to a parent there. I did a tour of one of their elementary schools that was really doing a lot with social and emotional development, which it was really interesting, a lot of neuroscience. But anyway, I was talking to this parent, and she said that one of the ways that she chose that school was she actually hired an education consultant, like somebody who Indeed, yes. I was like, what? People are actually having to hire help now to figure out what their options are and what might be best for them. And
Okay,
so maybe
I have a new career.
There you go. Sure.
Chicago needs these.
That was fascinating to me, though. Well, DC is interesting too because here in Ohio, like the charter schools and the regular schools, they taught, they know about each other and sometimes they collaborate or whatever, but not so much. I mean, you just don't hear about that. But in DC, they have like they actually do, like if you get into their lottery for preschool, because they have universal preschool there, and it's not universal, it's just like you can, if you're 3 and you want it, you can have it. And so that's actually pretty cool that we don't have that here.
They have that in Madison, sort of, only it's like a 4K, so if you want that, you can have it.
Yeah, this is 3, 4, but you have to enter a lottery and to get into the school. But the lottery will put you into the running for any school you want, include charter and public, which I thought was fascinating. The charter schools there actually have their own school board. It's like a DC charter school board, which we definitely don't have. Like if you're like, every charter school here is an island. Like they might have like more than one location, like Horizon Science Academy here does, and there's some others that are like chains, but yeah, otherwise they don't get together. That just doesn't happen. So I thought that was fascinating.
So you mentioned school boards, so maybe we can talk about really hyper-local stuff and how concerned citizens who may or may not be parents but who care about schooling and public schooling, how they can get involved, what they should be doing. When I asked my friends who are teachers, they said, join the school board or try to get on the school board. In Chicago, of course, we don't have an elected school board because Chicago just has to be special like that. We do, however, each school has something called a local school council that has seats both for parents and non-parents. So there's still ways to get involved. It's just even more local. We have a school board in Chicago. It's appointed by the mayor. So if you want more overwhelming